Are you guys out there? Oh, good, okay. Good morning. My name's Linda Christensen. Thanks for coming to the 5th Annual Northwest Teaching for Social Justice Conference. That should get a cheer of applause. It's the 5th one, yes. This is our yearly time to come together to remind ourselves that teaching does not belong in the hands of corporations who want to sell us products and tell us how to teach. It belongs in the hands of teachers who know how to do it. Today is an exemplary example, I think that's redundant, of what it looks like to teach for social justice. We have over 60 workshops of teachers who have come together and community partners to show what it looks like to do social justice education, and so welcome. This is a labor of love, and let me begin with that because we need more people to labor and love with us. This is an all-volunteer event, so it is not the American Education Research Association sponsored by Peterson and others, Gates, etc. This is all teachers who work all day and then spend their nights trying to organize this. Every Sunday night for the last few months, we gather together on a phone conversation and put this together. It's also a labor of love from the people at Madison High School, and so I'd like to take a moment to thank them. Kelly Gomez is right down here, who really has helped tremendously. Also Nancy Sullivan, the librarian, Petra Callan, the principal, Brady Bennon, Santa Cassell, who all have organized, Sue House organized within Madison High School to make this happen. Glenn Jacobs up in the booth, who is putting this helping put this together, and Ian Hurst, who is the tech person. In addition, there are just a few things that before I introduce Bob, I want to tell you about. Before I get to the room changes, I want to say this is a zero-waste school, and so you will see compost bins, so please don't put things in the garbage cans. There really are places for you to put every bit of waste. Sue House and the sustainability students have gone to a lot of trouble to help us out here to make that happen. The other thing I would like to say is this would not go as smoothly as it did without the help of all of the Madison students. I just can't believe we come here and there is this flanks of students. So when you see them today, if you could stop and thank them, the Red Cross, the the Red Cross, you know you're in good hands. The National Honor Society, the Vietnamese Club, the Peace Club are all here helping this effort. If you would take out your room, your thing that is a quick sheet of the room numbers and sessions, we made a couple of errors, so we just want to clarify those so you don't get lost. There are a couple of cancellations, so just to go through this quickly. The session countering consumer, are you still finding it? I still hear wrestling, so you must still be finding it. Okay. Okay, you ready? Countering consumerism in session 1, B16 is canceled. There are a couple of presenters who weren't able to make it because of emergencies. And B34, Smart Literature, Chloe Hughes, to challenge ableism, unfortunately is not able to be here either. The other one is there's B55, Gender and Sexuality 101, is going to be here, but it's changed to room B34. So if you're going to that, change it to B34. I'm going to sound slightly like a bingo player here. Session 2, Latinos in Action was in B55, and now it's in C60. B55 was our Achilles heel this time. Session 3 was in B55. It's now in B49. It's Act Out. Lynn act out. So if you're going to that one, it's in B49. So now, the other thing is that, as I said, it's a labor of love, and we would love it if you would help out at any point during the day. We need to restore teachers' classrooms to their order at the end of second and third session. So please help the presenter in that room to restore order. At the end of the day, taking up tables, whatever needs to be done, helping with lunch, just any place where you see it's kind of like a family gathering. Think of it that way. Mom doesn't have to be in the kitchen all day. So just help out where you can. If you see something that needs to be done, it'd be great if you could pitch in. Thank you. Our keynote this morning is Bob Peterson, and it's really hard to know where to begin with an introduction of Bob Peterson. He said, hurry up, because I need all the time to talk. So, but what I would like to say is that Bob has been a friend for a long time, and that in high school, this is where it all started. Bob worked with a youth group against hunger and was selected as a delegate to a conference in The Hague and asked to give a talk to hundreds of other youth delegates from around the world. Bob caused an international incident when he got up and gave a passionate speech arguing that if we really were serious about ending world hunger, we would need to end U.S. imperialism. This didn't endear him to his hosts. Let's just say that Bob was a precocious and defiant child. Bob is currently the president of the 7,000-strong Milwaukee Teachers Association, but he came to this position after spending 30 years in the classroom as a fifth-grade teacher. That should get a round of applause. Bob founded La Scuola Fratni, a two-way bilingual school in his neighborhood, and it has been a labor of love for many years. Many of you know about Bob's imaginative teaching from all of the books that he published with Rethinking Schools. He co-edited Rethinking Columbus, Rethinking Our Classrooms, Transforming Teacher Unions, Rethinking Globalization, Rethinking Math, and Rethinking Elementary Education. Without Bob, there would not be a Rethinking Schools. It started in his kitchen on a, what was it, Bob? An Apple IIe with rubber cement. And not only, I mean, I just want to say this because, I mean, we do think of Bob as being a saint. Because not only did Bob start all of this, but Bob's the one to get up at 6 in the morning, go and get bagels and cream cheese for us and Kringles, which they have in Wisconsin, and then run the meeting so to make sure that everybody gets heard. And then at the end of the day, to do the dishes and make sure that you know, when I arrive, I have flowers and chocolate chip cookies, and he always goes above and beyond. So a great friend, a great teacher leader. Welcome, Bob Peterson.
Greetings from Wisconsin. Greetings from the state that in the spring of 2011 saw the largest workers' uprising in modern U.S. history, led by teachers against an anti-labor, anti-public education Governor Scott Walker. I also bring you greetings from Karen Lutis, president of the Chicago Teachers Union and leader of the victorious Chicago Teachers Strike. She spoke to you last year. I talked with Karen on Thursday, and she asked me to give you her regards. She says she well remembers her remarks here, particularly a comment she made about Arnie Duncan. A month ago, in the midst of the Chicago strike, I traveled with 2 busloads of Milwaukee teachers to a massive rally of thousands of CTU members in Chicago. I thanked them for standing firm against Rahm Emanuel and noted that the Republican Governor Scott Walker and the Democratic Mayor Emanuel were 2 sides of a pro-corporate, pro-privatization, anti-teacher agenda. Now, later in this presentation, I'll return to the issue of privatization. But let me first pause and thank the organizers of this event. I particularly want to thank Linda and Bill, two close friends who I've worked with as editors of Rethinking Schools for as long as I can remember. I also want to thank Rethinking Schools editor Wayne Au from Seattle and Diane Watson from Portland, and all those of you who have written for Rethinking Schools. But most importantly, I want to thank each and every one of you for taking time on Saturday to come to this extraordinary gathering and being part of the social movement, the social justice education movement that is growing on a daily basis. It's truly an honor to speak to you. And I hope that one way that you'll be part of this movement is that you subscribe to Rethinking Schools. Doing that not only means you receive a great magazine, but you support a key component of the movement that in this digital age is struggling to survive. You might notice Newsweek went belly up just yesterday. I also want to welcome any student teachers here or people thinking of becoming teachers. Let's have a round of applause for them. And I'll just say that if you're looking for a job, we're going to be hiring 700 new teachers in Milwaukee next year. Starting wage will be about, if I get it right with the superintendent, $42,000. There's some drawbacks to Wisconsin, which you'll hear about, but what can I say? So today, I'm going to reflect on what it means to be a social justice teacher. And in my mind, it means four things. First, what I think we're most familiar with, it means teaching and organizing our classroom in ways that reflect social justice values. We foster anti-racist attitudes, an atmosphere of questioning, a classroom community that prefigures the kind of society that we wish to create. We encourage kids to talk back to media, their textbooks, and the established order, and hopefully not too often to us. We push kids to ask questions such as, whose voices are included and left out of children's literature, textbooks, and math problems? Most important, why are certain people's voice left out? And what's the relationship between poverty and wealth? Similarly, we encourage students to develop a sense of awe and appreciation for the natural world, and to understand that this planet's natural environment is more threatened today than at any other time in human history, and that they, the students, have the ability to do something about all of this. Second, social justice teacher, in my mind, means going beyond the classroom door and taking responsibility for a profession. I tell the members of my union that if there is a teacher down the hall or a school down the street that you would not send your own child to, then we have a responsibility to deal with that. In other words, that's a union responsibility, it's a professional responsibility. We have to create schools and school districts, not just classrooms, that embrace social justice education, the kind of teaching we're talking about, where our schools are what I call centers of renaissance and resistance, and I'll talk a little more about that later. Thirdly, it means connecting to parent and community struggles, both on educational and community issues. This was one of the key lessons of the Chicago teachers' strike. But it's more than just getting community support for our issues. It's supporting community struggles that aren't directly related to schools. As singer Bernice Johnson Reagan said, if you're in a coalition and you feel comfortable, your coalition is not big enough. Fourth, I think we need to have an international perspective. Around the planet, the 1% and their allies are defunding and privatizing the public sector. You've heard of austerity, right? It's like they're austerizing. You know, the austerizer, they're austerizing our society, our public sector, particularly public schools, and they're attempting to destroy public sector unions. We must be part of an international movement that supports the commons and the public sectors. We need to be able to take the offensive. In my mind, the antidote to what's happening internationally is to reclaim the word democracy and to promote democracy in all spheres of society, political, social, and economic. we should echo the words of Indian writer Arundhati Roy, who says, privatization of essential infrastructure is essentially undemocratic. In our political struggles, whether in our workplace, our community, or in the legislative chambers, let's demand genuine democracy. So great, some of you may be thinking, here's a speaker who comes to tell me that we have to do more at a time when expectations for classroom teachers are astronomically unrealistic. And I know, even though I've been released to be full-time teacher now, as Linda said, I've taught for many years and worked for justice throughout those times. And like most fifth grade teachers in Milwaukee, I've had to teach reading, writing, spelling, language, speaking, history, geography, current events, science, human growth and development, second step violence reduction, art, physical education, music, and little things like how to come in from recess, hang up your coat, get a drink of water without having a fit because your ex-best friend got to the drinking fountain first. But that's why we're here. We come together because we can't do this alone. People often ask me, Bob, how have you sustained yourself all these years? And one answer is, I haven't done it alone. I'm an organizer. I get other people to do the work. I do a little myself. No great social movement, though, has ever been built by individuals. We need to be part of organizations, school communities, coalitions, study circles, PTAs, rank and file caucuses, and our unions, making sure that those organizations, particularly our unions, stand up not just for bread and butter issue, but for professional issues and for social justice issues in the community and around the world. And finally, we need to self-consciously define ourselves as a social movement for educational justice. So I'm going to talk about all these things by telling you how I became a social justice teacher and a social justice organizer. I believe that the better we understand our own histories, our racial, our gender, our class, our ecological, our activist histories, the better we'll be able to teach and organize for social justice. So that's the focus of today's speech, my journey to teaching and organizing for social justice. So let's return to Madison. That's where I was born, capital of Wisconsin. I was born there. I grew up in a white neighborhood. I attended an all-white school. I went to an all-white church, watched all-white TV shows. Heck, even our house was painted white. Unconsciously, I learned that one of the biggest privileges of being white in the United States is that one doesn't have to think about one's race, of being white. It's perceived by many as a universal norm. But my life changed at 12 years of age, 1966, when my father moved our family to Africa for 2 years, where he worked with the Ministry of Agriculture in Egypt, spending my formative teen years in a country that was not white, that was not Christian, that was not wealthy, not English-speaking. Heck, they didn't even use a Roman alphabet, so you couldn't understand the street signs. It awakened me to a world my white cocoon had hidden. I'll remember, one day sticks in my mind in particular, I'll never forget it. My father suggested we go to a picnic to a lesser-known pyramid called the Red Pyramid that we would climb, about 20 kilometers south of Cairo. My mother packed a lunch in her cooler, including 2 cans of imported dietetic soda from my brother Don, who was a juvenile diabetic. This was before the sugar-free soda flooded the world market. Glass bottles of Coca-Cola were plentiful in Egypt, but we could only get dietetic soda by importing it from 4,000 miles away. We climbed into our Blue Force station wagon, and off we went. Although we picnicked in what we thought was an isolated spot in the desert with the Red Pyramid in the distance, by the time we were halfway through the lunch, a small group of children gathered around a car. They called out in Arabic, "Bakshish, bakshish." They wanted a tip or money. Their soiled hands poked through the open car windows, begging for a world that would never be theirs. I felt uncomfortable, wanting to give them something, but knowing that tourists were, quote, not encouraged to give money, no matter how beguiling or cute. If we give these children even a piastre, my dad explained, soon the whole village will be surrounding our car. After being turned down, the children kept a safe distance. And when we had finished our last of our sandwiches and fruit, we did, however, give the children something. As we left, my dad told my brother Don to throw his 2 empty aluminum cans out the window in the direction of the kids. The cans bounced off the gritty Sahara sand, and the children rushed to scoop them up. I watched out the back window. The children piled on top of the cans, arguing and fighting for the right to be the owner of their newly found prizes. My thoughts rode on the children's screams of joy. "Oh, they're playing with them like they're toys," I said, and stared transfixed. The rest of the day, I didn't think about our ascent to the pyramid's windswept peak. I was preoccupied by the memory of children fighting over what we had thrown away. Why was I in the car tossing trash to poor kids instead of begging for a piaster or an empty can? That incident left a huge mark on my psyche and punched a hole in the cocoon that had protected my white middle-class upbringing in Madison. I didn't understand the reasons, but experience like that helped me realize that something was fundamentally messed up about the world. Now, I'm going to pause here for a moment and ask you to think of a time in your life, one of the first times in your life, that you realize that there are racial or class injustice. Could be a minor incident. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask you to think about it. So right now you should be thinking. And I'm going to give you 2 minutes to talk to a partner. One person's going to start in 1 minute. Just tell them whatever first comes to your mind. I'll call out switch, and then after a minute, and then the second person will have a minute. So I'd like you to, if you're by yourself, get close to somebody, and this won't hurt. It really, I promise. Well, maybe, depending on who you're sitting next to. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll briefly mention one other incident that happened in Egypt. It was part of my activist history. While in Egypt, I attended Cairo American College, an international school. I was in middle school. I was in junior high. It was in the old palace of King Farouk's, the corrupt British colonial puppet who had been run out of the country by Nasser and some of his friends. My 8th grade classroom was actually in Farouk's old bedroom, and the bathroom was a 10 by 10 adjacent room that was made completely out of alabaster. It was pretty bizarre. Had a lot of organizing meetings in that bathroom. I was elected junior high president of the student council, and one of the big problems we had a very incompetent math teacher who regularly mistreated students, especially children who weren't white. There were some white people there, the Americans are everywhere. That kind of American. And specifically Mustafa, my friend who was an Egyptian. I organized a petition campaign, got most of the 7th and 8th graders to sign it, asking that the teacher be fired. The school board president, as it were, refused, and so then I called another meeting in this really nice alabaster room and of the core of the student council, and we decided the next time that she mistreated Mustafa, we would walk out. And she did. So we walked out of the 8th grade classroom into the other, got them all to walk out, then in the 7th grade, got all them out, and then we went out and just sat down underneath the palm trees. Our principal was fairly upset. He yelled at us and accused me of trying to conduct a coup d'etat. It's not the first, it wasn't the last time. Ultimately, there was a stalemate. They said they would address some of our concerns, and we returned to class. But it was my first taste of power, of collective action. A lone complaint is too often like that leaf just blowing in the wind. But when we unite together, we are the entire tree, able to withstand some of the strongest of gale forces. So my student organizing continued, went to high school, as referred to by Linda, back in Madison, and when my family returned there. And I was reminded of that this past spring of 2011 during the worker uprising. Let me paint a picture of Madison. The downtown is a narrow isthmus, between two lakes. The state capitol is in the center of that isthmus built on a hill. Now, the Capitol is almost an exact replica of the United States Capitol, so you can get a picture in your mind. Now, there's a difference. The Wisconsin Capitol wasn't built by enslaved Africans, but at the height of the protests last year, there were sometimes upwards of 4,000 or 5,000 people inside the Capitol, and then tens of thousands of people marching around the square on the outside. And from the steps of the Capitol, you can look west down a long street called State Street to the UW-Madison campus. On one cold day in February, when all the teachers at my school, La Scuola Fraternity, had called in absent and joined in tens of thousands of other teachers and workers in a spontaneous political strike, I stood on the Capitol steps gazing down State Street. And I saw this police car with flashing red lights and a large crowd of protesters walking behind it. Now, interestingly enough, at the height of the uprising in Madison, the Madison police refused to cooperate with the state patrol and the Capitol police. And there would be contingents of police with T-shirts that says, "Cops for Labor," marching with us every day. Now, as I watched the marchers slowly walk towards us, I thought, good, the university students are coming out again. And as they got closer, you know, as I looked past, you might have Ian's Pizza. You might have heard that. That's a place that gave free pizza out to any of the marchers, and they got donations from around the world, which was pretty good because we were often very hungry, walking and walking and walking. But as they got closer, I could hear their chants, like, "What's disgusting? Union busting. What's disgusting?" And the other one that was very famous, "Tell me what democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like. Tell me what democracy looks like. Tell me what democracy looks like." And it is. This conference is a good example of democracy. But as a tradition has it, when a contingent would come up, the throngs that are marching around the square would part and stop and let people in. This happened regularly. Perhaps the most moving was the daily contingents of firefighters, dressed in full gear, often led by a half dozen firefighters playing bagpipes, if you can imagine. It just got you. On this day, the students, about 25 abreast, marched through the cheering crowd directly up the marble steps to the Capitol. I looked at the marchers and thought, I know I'm old, but these university students look really young. And then I saw a sign amongst the many placards, "High school students support our teachers." I asked one student who they were. "We're from West High School." We shut it down. The entire student body marched out to support our teachers. They'd been out for several days, and we knew they'd get in trouble if they stayed out anymore, so we decided to close down the school ourselves. Now, later that day, I had a chance to talk to some of the students, and I told them that West High was my alma mater. I told them that I'd help organize teach-ins and walkouts against the Vietnam War and for civil rights and student rights, but had never exceeded in closing the entire school down. What surprised them the most, however, was when I told them about the very first sit-in I participated in at West High School. It was in front of the principal's office, and the demand was that girls be allowed to wear pants to school. They were speechless. I am old. As a high school organizer, I did help to organize the Walk for Development, which referenced what led me to have the privilege of going down to Mississippi and spending time with Fannie Lou Hamer, where I learned a lot. I also organized Wisconsin Youth for Democratic Education, which in its heyday published a monthly newsletter, serviced 30 underground newspapers, and we had our own bus, a traveling bookstore, which we went and parked in front of high schools around the state and helped try to organize. The lessons from those days that I've taken into my teaching is to never underestimate children's and youth's sense of justice and their eagerness to help and to organize and their power. I tell my fifth grade students every year the story of me sitting in front of the principal's office demanding the girls be allowed to wear pants. Sometimes they immediately, with their complaints, say, "Let's go down to the principal's office now." I usually tell the story as a first act before I play Holly Near's song, "Old Time Women," as one of my songs of the week, and I read a picture book about Amelia Bloomer. Being a fifth grade teacher, I've often thought of myself as a conductor of a relatively undisciplined, or in some days, dysfunctional orchestra. My curriculum is rich with literature circles and writing projects and dramas and role plays, and through it I try to encourage my students to stand up for what's right. From the smallest thing like struggles over dress, to standing up against bullying, to broader social issues of the day. My students have organized a variety of clubs that usually meet over my meager half-hour lunch. The voluntary clubs tend to correspond to the social movements of the day: Kids Against Child Labor, Students to Save the Neighborhood Swimming Pool, Immigrant Rights, Rescue Our Librarians Club. Yes. Kids, and they made it wasn't just our librarian at Fratney, it was for everybody. Kids Against the Iraq War. That's one of the side benefits of living in an imperialist country like our own. There's always a war going on that you can involve students in critiquing. In fact, anyone in 7th grade or younger has lived their entire life under the shadow of the U.S.-Afghanistan war. Just as whiteness has been normalized, a state of war has become the new normal in the United States. Now, last year, many Fratney students and parents joined the protests in Madison, traveling in carpools and on teacher union buses. At school, under the guidance of our art teacher at Fratney, whose position was eliminated because of Walker's cuts, students made colorful posters that read, "This business supports Wisconsin workers," and then asked neighborhood businesses to display them. In my class, students wrote about their concerns. I'll share one example. It grew out of a simple after lunch, sit down and be quiet and write in your journal time. The prompt, you'd probably never do that. The prompt was 7 words long, what the budget cuts mean to me. As I walked around my classroom and encouraged students, I came to Edie Redwine, a student of Irish and Ojibwe origin. She had finished and said I could read her journal. I read it quickly and said, "Great poem." She looked up at me with a penetrating glare that reminded me of how my 2 daughters, when they were younger, would look at me after I'd said something that they deemed particularly stupid. And Edie would reply, "It's not a poem, it's a letter to the governor." Okay. She has since given me permission to read it, and I will do that. A letter to Governor Scott Walker. Budget cuts, an unfair mutiny that destroys the economy and slowly tears apart all humanity, and makes the flaws of ourselves that much deeper, that much bigger, and that much more hurtful. It's hard to believe that all this circles around Governor Walker, the king of destroying schools and jobs. So congratulations, Scott. You ruined kids' lives. Now, isn't that a sport? Sincerely, just a student. P.S. Kids are the future. Frightened? Now, just for the record, Edie read it as a poem at the 5th grade graduation celebration in front of 200 parents, and she got thunderous applause. She also sent it to Governor Walker and got no reply. Now, I should note a caution that while at Fratney we have many progressive parents, the city of Milwaukee is surrounded by a noose of white conservatism that daily is incited by right-wing radio talk shows. For example, the day after it was announced that I was Wisconsin Elementary Teacher of the Year in 1995, Charlie Sykes, a widely listened to talk show host, spent 2 days claiming that I was committing child abuse in my classroom. It's true. I mean, it's not true that I committed. It's true that he was claiming. Clarification here. His evidence, an article in Rethinking Schools where I had written about getting my 5th graders to look at gender and race bias in the entries in a new CD-ROM encyclopedia. Now, I take great care to be nonpartisan and not tell children what to think. What I do demand is, though, that they do think, and that through role plays, dramatization, and debate, and critical inquiry, they look at issues from multiple perspectives, interrogating in whose interests certain perspectives serve. I'll add that Charlie Sykes after being invited by every single staff person at our school to come and watch me teach, refused. Now, earlier I painted a picture of Madison where I grew up. Let me now paint a picture of Milwaukee. 70 miles east of Madison on the shores of Lake Michigan. Milwaukee is just under 600,000 inhabitants, about 10% of the state's population, but 50% of the state's people of color. I moved there after dropping out of college and completing a one-year program at Madison Area Technical College. I moved with a group of political friends to organize the working class, as Milwaukee was at the time a manufacturing powerhouse. But as they say in show business, timing is everything. And I came in the early 1970s, about the time that the capitalists had decided to abandon Milwaukee and move most unionized factories to the south or overseas. Maybe they heard I was coming, I don't know, and they were scared, but I don't think so. Seriously, the impact on the city was devastating, particularly for the black working class. Our city lost tens of thousands of family-sustaining jobs. I worked in a box-making factory for a while and was in a union that had a union that was as moribund as the factory. I then became a longshoreman, discovered the real meaning of a corrupt union. It was ILA, not the West Coast ILWU. And after a friend of mine was killed on the job, I moved on and eventually became a paraprofessional in the Milwaukee Public Schools on a special team to intervene in schools with racial problems stemming from the court-ordered desegregation. Now, Milwaukee has a long history of white supremacy and hypersegregation. And despite a brief flirtation with school desegregation in the late 70s, it remains one of the most segregated metropolitan areas in the nation. It's one of the nation's top 10 most impoverished cities. Nearly 1 of 3 residents are living in poverty. 50% of the children are. Black male joblessness is around 53%. A recent study concluded that Milwaukee has among the highest infant mortality rate in the nation in one north side zip code. The rate of infant mortality among black children is higher than in the Gaza Strip. And Wisconsin has the highest incarceration rate of black males of any state in the nation. It's not something to be proud of. The Milwaukee Public Schools educates about 80,000 children. 90% of the students are of color. 83% receive free and reduced lunch. 20% special ed. 10% English as second language, English language learners. 3.5%, that's nearly 3,000 students, verified homeless. Now, ever since 1980, when the schools became majority minority, funding relative to the suburbs has declined. But the unique story about Milwaukee is that it's ground zero for privatization. As an industrial base and family-sustaining jobs were fleeing and the city leaders were giving up on school desegregation, the powers that be implemented a private voucher program. In 1990, it started as an experiment with only 300 students, but it quickly expanded once the courts ruled that money could go to religious schools. The program now includes over 110 schools, nearly 24,000 students, essentially the second largest school district in Wisconsin. It has virtually no public accountability, not subject to open meetings, open record laws, and yet has consumed over $1 billion of public funds since its start. 85% of the children who receive vouchers go to religious schools. For the first 15 years of the program, there was no requirements to be a teacher. And finally, after 15 years, in 2005, the state legislature passed a law saying a teacher needed a high school diploma or GED. Last year, they finally raised it to a BA, but no teacher certification. Less than 2% of the voucher students have IEPs, special ed that I'm talking about, compared with a 20% in MPS. There are more special needs children in one high school in Milwaukee than all 110 voucher schools in the city. Now, why do people send their kids there? Well, first of all, they get a free religious education, and something I have a problem with, church and state kind of stuff. And secondly, because the schools don't have very many discipline problems. Because if a kid is disruptive, they get kicked out. Guess where they go? The public schools. As MPS loses market share to these private schools and semi-private charter schools that are chartered by the city and the university, it means tens of millions of dollars less for the district. This combined with Governor Walker's budget that expanded voucher program outside of the city of Milwaukee, while cutting to the Milwaukee Public Schools about $80 million a year for the last 2 years, has meant that a year ago, 1,000 positions were reduced, and this year, several hundred. So in 1999, there were 100 full-time art teachers in the K-8 schools in Milwaukee. Last year, there were 11. Music and physical education teachers, librarians are endangered species. Many elementary teachers have next to no planning time and have to teach music, phy-ed, and art, in addition to the academic subjects. Class sizes have skyrocketed. High schools, mid-30s to mid-40s. Same with middle schools. Even some of our K4 and K5 classes have 30 kids with no paraprofessional. And while the governor cut the MPS funding, gave $10 million more for additional private schools, he had the gall to blame greedy teachers and teacher unions for the dismal state of education. Getting a little emotional. Basically, using it as a way to try to eliminate public sector unions' right to collectively bargain, which he succeeded at. He also took away the fair share provision whereby people who are public employees are automatically in the union. So now we have to convince people to join our union voluntarily. A considerable challenge considering for the past 30 years, what they've associated with unionism is collective bargaining and enforcing the contract, something we can no longer do. So that maybe that's when I was elected president of the MTA 16 months ago, my friends didn't know whether to congratulate me or give me condolences. So you get the picture. Things in Milwaukee are no longer like Laverne and Shirley show. They're a bit worse. And I didn't even start to talk about the impact of No Child Left Behind and that's impact on Milwaukee. I figure you already know all about that. We all suffer from the testing craze that has always plagued this nation, even before No Child Left Behind. And I'll sum up by the thoughts on that issue by repeating what I said to the Chicago teachers last month when I spoke to them. I thank them for demanding that the children not suffer an apartheid-like education system. Whether in Wisconsin or Chicago, Little Rock or Los Angeles, I said students deserve the same resources as their affluent counterparts. Our students deserve an education rich in the arts, strong in physical education, and rigorous in study. They do not deserve a dumbed-down, data-drenched, test-driven curriculum. I want to be clear. I didn't come here to this conference to be a Debbie Downer, but I do want to alert you about the possible future. You know, Portland is only 2 or 3 hours behind cities like Milwaukee, New Orleans, Philadelphia, Newark. And you have to keep in mind, these are the cities where the corporate education reformers and the 1% backers are experimenting and having some success. They intend to turn schools into investment opportunities, teachers into mindless technicians, critical teaching into basic skills training, and ignore issues of creativity, the arts, character building, and the love of learning and life. It's part of a larger corporate agenda. Defund the public sector. Criticize it then for being ineffective, and then privatize it. And while you're at it, get rid of their main opposition, public sector unions. But that bleak future is not a given. We are not objects of history to be acted upon. We are subjects of history. We are makers of history. And I figure if after all that's happened in Milwaukee and Wisconsin, we can still be fighting and winning battles, there is hope. And that's the silver lining. That's the silver lining. That's the silver lining in Governor Walker's attack on the working class. It opened up thousands of people's eyes to the fact that we live not in a democracy, but a plutocracy, and that we must model civic courage to our colleagues and our students. Civic courage, the notion that we should act as if we live in a democracy. Despite all our defeats, including our failed attempt to recall Walker last June, there is a stronger movement for social justice in Wisconsin now than in previous decades. It confirms something that the great Brazilian educator Paulo Freire once said. He said, "Conflict is the midwife of consciousness." Governor Walker did much more in educating people about the political realities in 1 month than I have done in a lifetime passing out leaflets and conducting workshops. And that's the case. In the time remaining, I'm going to highlight a few examples of how we are reaching success. I'm going to re-paraphrase a famous Margaret Mead quote that a small group of people can change the world, especially if they build a larger social movement. In my 6th year of teaching, that included a year of being laid off my 3rd year. I was really annoyed with the traditional school I was at. I was sick and tired of traipsing down to the school board with my friends, always on the defensive, frustrated with academic journals and the union newsletter that was boring, never speaking about the real issues. So I first organized a study group, and then the Rethinking Schools, which Linda referred to. We never had enough money to pay a printer for the costs until after the issue was published. We used the newspaper, which was originally a newsprint tabloid, pass it out free to organized teachers in Milwaukee. Progressive Union Caucus, protest against scripted curriculum, protest against standardized testing. And once we linked up with the likes of Bill and Linda, we published Rethinking Columbus, sold over 250,000 copies. Since then, we've published 20 more books, and this year we're celebrating our 26th anniversary. Thank you. But Rethinking Schools is more than a particular book or issue. We have tried to define and build a movement that looks at teaching from the perspective of the classroom and through the lens of social justice. We were among the first to critique private school vouchers, to openly call for anti-racist education, and to call for a new form of teacher unionism, social justice unionism. A few years after we started Rethinking Schools, I continued to be frustrated at my school, and a school in my neighborhood, a working-class neighborhood, was about to be closed and maybe torn down, and that's where the origin of Fraternity was. We organized a community-wide struggle. We put out a call for the school to create an anti-racist, whole-language, two-way bilingual, site-based managed neighborhood specialty school. We called La Escuela Fraternity for short. And even though the superintendent opposed us, we organized mass meetings, petitions, and convinced the school board to let us run the school. It was a change maker. For previous years, I taught in schools, and if there was a problem, we just basically wash our hands and blame the principal with a fair amount of accuracy. We hadn't expected to win Fraternity. Some of us are seasoned activists, and in this country, a seasoned activist is really used to losing. So all of a sudden, we had the school in our hands, but we were full of energy and determined to create that school. And I'll tell you, I don't think I could have survived teaching as long as I have if it hadn't been for that environment. A staff that's genuinely empowered, informed by principles of social justice pedagogy. It's what I call a center for resistance and renaissance, an island of democracy in a beleaguered neighborhood and community. We have an explicit commitment to social justice curriculum and building classrooms as laboratories of social justice. Our schools try to operate on democratic principles and view ourselves as learning communities. Because of the politicized nature of our curriculum and our collective discussion, we often have the largest turnouts of staff and parents at rallies or in the community. Teachers try to foster the civic courage I referenced. At Fraternity, it has included the big and small, from organizing against the closing of a swimming pool in the neighborhood to demonstrating against runaway shops, defending the rights of undocumented students. It was at Fraternity that for the first 2 years, Educators Network for Social Justice met. People from around the world and the country actually visited that school. They say, "Are you a charter school?" No. We believe that all public schools should be innovative. The lessons of Fraternity are basic. Schools need a unity of mission and commitment to common pedagogy. There has to be deep collaboration between the principal and the teachers and other staff. And there has to be a serious parent-community involvement. Now, for many years in Fraternity, we didn't use very many textbooks. I basically use them to critique and show how bad they are with my fifth graders. But we have to, as social justice activists, have to deal with textbooks. And I'm just going to mention two more stories and then conclude with a poem from my student. Every 7 years, there's new textbooks adopted. They have textbook adoption committees in Milwaukee. A couple years ago, 4 years ago, there was one around social studies, K-5 to 5th grade. And I decided to intervene. I read the three 600-page textbooks on U.S. history that's for 5th grade, and they didn't mention the word racism. Twice they mentioned the word discrimination. Nothing about social movements. It's remarkable, quite frankly, when you actually analyze it. So I put out an email saying, let's get together and talk about this. Some people, I didn't expect much more than a public hearing and we could educate people about how bad they were, but it picked up. Different groups of people, leaders in the African American, Latino, and Jewish community said, yeah, this is really bad. Let's do something about it. Make a long story short, we organized and convinced the school board to take back a $7 million contract with Houghton Mifflin. Houghton Mifflin was really upset. And that's led to a whole conversation in the district about the need to promote anti-racist, anti-bias education, which resulted just a month ago, it's a long 4 years, of the district agreeing to release 3 full-time teachers to be what we call culturally responsive teacher leaders. It's a step. That same group, which we called the Social Studies Task Force, which met around that issue, came back in play a year later when the Democratic mayor and the Democratic governor of Wisconsin, with Arne Duncan's encouragement, tried to do a mayoral takeover of her school board. Immediately called up the people who had been involved in the Social Justice Task Force. We started meeting in the basement of the NAACP office once a week for 5 months. We created the largest education coalition in the city for decades, and we defeated the attempt to have a mayoral takeover in the Milwaukee Public Schools. And most recently, despite the defeat in June, there was a Democratic primary in August for state assembly and state senate, and it was just between the Democrats. On one side, there were pro-voucher, pro-privatization Democrats supported by the American Federation for Children and DEFR, Democrats for Education Reform. On the other side, there were pro-public education Democrats that we supported in the unions and community. Every single one of our candidates won in those elections in August. And finally, I guess you could say that what I've tried to do in the union has had some impact. We've started a campaign to reimagine and reinvent the MTA. We've reorganized our staff to be organizers in our schools. We've released 2 full-time people to be directors of teaching and learning. And we started the Milwaukee Center for Teaching, Learning, and Public Education. We're taking up the issue of professional development and helping new teachers fulfill the requirements that they have to in order to continue in the profession. I'll talk more about that at a workshop later this afternoon. I'd like to just close by saying that, you know, some teachers, they know I'm in Rethinking Schools, they know I'm president of the union, and they come back and say, you know, but with all this scripted curriculum, I just can't go on, I can't do this. You know, I can't teach social justice. And I say, well, there's 2 things about it. One is, then let's fight against it. And we set up a task force. The school board, we went to the school board and got a task force set up on developmentally appropriate practices for early childhood education that's going to be between the Milwaukee Teachers Union and the administration to retool the K to 2nd grade practices to fight back against the horrible situations that happened because of the testing. That was after a larger mobilization of our members. And secondly, I'd say to teachers, integrate it into your curriculum. I mean, you can take a math problem about multiplication and change it from multiplying things about how much do candy bars cost to multiplying about how much do child laborers in Honduras make an hour making products for Walmart. It was in that it can be done. It's not that much. And I'm going to close by sharing with you two poems by one of my students, which came up in my classroom when we were doing a project around sweatshop math, as I call it, in Rethinking Globalization. I was showing pictures of kids working in conditions in India, actually the farm workers here in the United States, and so on and so forth. And one of my students, Oswaldo, raised his hand, and he said, he doesn't usually contribute to the classroom. He said, I know all about that. I used to do that when I was 5 years old. You did? I said, yeah, I worked in the fields with mi abuela. I thanked him for his comment. We talked some more. I asked him if he'd liked working in the fields, secretly hoping he'd confirm that the problems with child labor that we'd been talking about. And he said, yeah, it was sort of fun. For a while, he said. Well, didn't you want to go to school instead? He said, no. Full well, no, he knew I was hoping for a different answer. He said, the teachers there were mean. If you misbehaved in school, the teacher put biting ants down your back. Yeah, that's a discipline technique I've never used. My only response was, oh, that's reason enough not to want to go to school. Later in that day, I asked him to write a poem about his experience, and here's what he did. And it's called A 5-Year-Old Boy by Osvaldo Espinosa, based on the true life of Osvaldo. I'm a 5-year-old boy working to support my family. I am a boy walking for a mile just to get clean water out of the pozo, the well. I'm a boy carrying a sack full of caña more than a mile. I'm a boy watching for snakes and scorpions while working. I'm a boy carrying food for my farm animals. I'm a boy working for hours in the sun. I'm a boy working in pain in my back and arms and legs. I'm a boy sleeping with pain and bruises on my fingers. He showed that to me, and it's like, oh, that was like moving. I said, do you want to write about coming here? He said, no. I said, why don't you write then about how it is here? He said, so the next day he came back with this poem. I'm a 5-year-old boy living in the United States. I'm a boy eating strange food. I'm a boy going to school. I'm a boy seeing for my first time a show. I'm a boy having my first game station. I'm a boy seeing other people like African Americans, Puerto Ricans, and Americans. I'm a boy living happily in my new home. I'm a boy feeling sad for being far away from my grandma and grandpa. And I'm a boy getting chubbier each year for not working. He was pretty chubby. A few weeks later, I explained to my class that I was going to do a keynote at a math conference called Numbers Count. And if anybody wanted to write about why numbers count, they should do that. And so he got into poetry through this conversation. And so this is his poem, and it's dated. It was, you'll see, during the Iraq War. Numbers count. Numbers do count, Mr. President. 2,453 American soldiers are dying. 17,648 soldiers are wounded. 35,161 innocent Iraqi people are dying. $281,864,948 are wasted in the war. Imagine how much we can do around the world with that money. We can feed the needy, build houses, give scholarships, and much more. Do you care about the people? I do. We care about people. We wouldn't have gone into teaching if we didn't. But we also recognize that in this class-stratified and racially divided society, we have to do more than just care. We have to teach and organize for justice. We need to create classrooms that are laboratories for social justice. We need to create schools that are centers of renaissance and resistance in our beleaguered neighborhoods. We need to transform our teacher unions into social justice unions. And we need to be organized in a plethora of different organizations, building a social justice education movement that is linked to many other movements for social justice in our society and around the world. But this will not be easy. Our nation's leaders are promoting privatization and choice as solutions to social problems, while mass media promotes consumption as solutions to individual problems. But history teaches us that hope can defeat despair. I tell my 10-year-old students at the beginning of each school year that we are going to learn about the great social movements throughout history and study some of the great conflicts of all time. I tell my students we're going to go back, going to look at the current movements of social justice, like the movement for immigrant rights, the movement to end sweatshops and child labor, the movement to stop global warming. And I tell them that there will be social movements in the future, and that will be their choice, that it is up to them, as it is up to each and every one of us, to decide if we are going to participate in those great social movements of our time and intervene on the side of justice and life on this planet. This will be our students' choice. It is now our choice. Let us continue to choose the struggle for justice. Let us choose hope over despair. Thank you very much.